Welcome to the Conservative Continuum. I am your host, Mick Meow. We have some announcements to make. Americans for America presents the Red, White, and Green St. Patrick's Day celebration. That's Friday, March the 17th at Ecclesia of Oklahoma. That's 2222 West Hefner Road in Oklahoma City. There's going to be a silent auction. There's going to be food. There's going to be green beer. There's going to be door prizes. There's going to be live music by Boats Against the Current. And most importantly, there's going to be God's comic, Brad Stein. Now, you can go to my social media websites and you can find that Eventbrite link. So go today. Make sure you get your tickets. The Oklahoma County Convention is going to be this Saturday, March 11th at Higher Plain Baptist Church, which is 6810 Northwest 122nd. The registration is from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. and the registration fee is $20. So we hope to see you there. And if you're a delegate, you make sure and get on out there and vote. Now, please make sure you subscribe to me on patreon.com/McMeow. You can also find the Conservative Continuum on Facebook and Rumble. So today we have a dialectic cat show with Steve Coughlin. He is the founder and president of Unconstrained Analytics, and he is the leading expert in the United States on the Islamic doctrine. He's going to lead us in a Marxist dialectic speech and in service, if you will, really. It is a little longer today. It's about 2 hours, but he's going to describe in detail the weaponization attacks of words, narratives, dialogues, and that illusion that is being used to destroy our national identity and America itself. So, this is important. Stick with me today, okay? Grab your kitty treats and your milk, and let's get ready to engage. Well, it's time for the caterwaul, so let's get to it. I am honored today to have a guest. His name is Steve Coughlin today. He's with us, and he's an attorney, and he's a decorated intelligence officer and a noted specialist on Islamic law, ideology, and associated issues as they are related to terrorism and subversion. So Mr. Coughlin is the founder and president of Unconstrained Analytics. He has committed the last 5 to 6 years to exposing the systemic destruction of our national identity that is resulting in the systemic disenfranchisement of Americans from their historic America through a heavily biased manipulation of dialectics. So I'm quoting him now. The West begins here, recognizing that organized destruction is a mass line attack to destroy America through political warfare lines of effort structured to that end. Organized destruction is simply what neo-Marxists commit to when pledging to destroy the culture. Mr. Coughlin is going to take us through some heavy lifting and brain expansion. I know I'm going to have to really pay attention because building those synapses are important. But we must recognize that there is no possible way to defeat Marxism without recognizing this dialectical nature of their attacks. If we try and fight back without this basic understanding, we are actually playing the role that they have scripted for us, and hence we will participate in our own destruction. So after the break, please join me in welcoming Steve Coughlin to the show. Welcome to the Conservative Continuum. I am your host, Mick Meow. Today, as I have promised you, we have an incredibly necessary series, and I am so grateful to the guests that we have. Stephen Coughlin. This is going to be phenomenal. This is what we've been talking about when we're talking about DEI, and we're talking about cognitive manipulation, and we're talking about discourse manipulation. The gentleman we have for you today is an expert, so I'm hoping that everybody is ready and prepared. Can I call you Stephen?
No, you can call me Sir Stephen the Great. Thank you for being
Sir
on. Yes,
Stephen the Great. I love it.
Of course you could call me Steve.
You
It's
know,
better than what other people call me. How's that?
my cat makes me call him Sir, so you know. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for coming on, Stephen. It is an honor to have you on. I have been listening to your videos, and I have been reading your blogs at unconstrainedanalytics.org. It is a phenomenal website, and it rings true that we are in this warfare. And I've heard you say this, that false information is being passed off as truth, and true information is being passed off as in a false context. So there is a ton to unpack here, and it's extremely important. I did warn the audience that you were going to hurt our brains a little bit, but in a good way. So I'm excited, and we're ready for you to unpack this for us.
Well, thank you, Mick. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give a couple pieces early on. One is just going to be something on how the dialectic works as a kind of, let's put this in place, program your mind to understand it. And that's everybody, including myself. Then, given time, what I'll do is I'll give a short little presentation on, just by a short presentation on quotes by Marxists and fellow travelers. And so what I want to do is show some quotes that that line up to how we want people to look at the main effort. And it's going to start with the word mass line, because we have used the word mass line for a lot of stuff, and people will say, why do you use mass line? That we wrote for people on Capitol Hill in 2018 came out in 2019. It's called Remembering the Misremembered Left. Remember because it's been forgotten. And what we do think we know is misremembered. It's wrong, and it's deliberately wrong. In fact, we go so far as to say that the very way we talk about the left guarantees that we can never get to an answer. And that will lead you to the recognition that we're in a sorcerer circle, or in a controlled narrative, or, if you will, the blue pill universe of the Matrix. I'll go to me directly because I have a couple books here that all I have to do is show you the covers of the book, and that's if we have time. But then there's a little piece on intersectionality that will be based on what we're looking at today. So if that is helpful, and I'm rambling here, that's where we're going. Me, I am an attorney by trade. international law, comparative international law were things I did. I worked for the two largest international publishing companies, but I was also a reserve officer. Both me and my wife were Russian language qualified in intelligence and trained in those areas. I was deployed for Desert Storm as an officer. 9/11 happened. Both me and my wife were mobilized for the war on terror, and I was put in the targeting cell of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So I was in the Joint Chiefs of Staff, J2 Intelligence Directorate. By the way, so was my wife. In fact, she was in the Pentagon when it gets hit. And I think I have to remove all the blunt objects when people tell her a plane didn't crash there when she was physically present. And they talk to her as if she's in need of a memory correction or something like that. So one of the things that happened was I started raising some serious questions about how we were characterizing the war. And I wrote a thesis explaining that our understanding of the Islamic aspects of jihadi terrorism was fundamentally wrong. In fact, so wrong that the National Intelligence University, that's what it's called today. But I then wrote a book called Catastrophic Failure, Blindfolding America in the Face of Jihad. Given that, I have a classic training in Cold War Marxist politics and in terrorism, especially Islamic-based terrorism. I've been asked to become a professor to teach a master's degree course, which I do at a university. And so I have the military capability. I was at the Joint Chiefs of Staff on the J2 Directorate in the targeting division. J2 is intelligence. I was at the Central Command in the J2 there, and J5, which is strategic plans, where I worked some issues having to do with strategic communications. And when I retired, I was the S2, the intelligence officer for a theater information operations group, TIOG. I might get beat up by the people who push me up, but they have a hard time proving I'm wrong. So with that, I will open that up, and if you want to follow up, have any further questions, we could start going.
No, I don't have any follow-up questions, but I just want people to be aware when we say expert, we mean expert. So that's phenomenal. Thank you so much for telling us that. With that, I am going to sit back and absorb.
So what I like to do before we go to the piece on the dialectic, and this is going to be about the dialectic too, is this is actually one of the last slides of a build. An incredible slide. It explains everything. And it's called, we're going to talk about the fact that the left operates along narrative arcs. Okay. In our world, all narratives are fiction. And these fictions exist to overwrite the facts of our existence. Okay, now we'll get to that later. But what I want to show is you see at the top of this graphic, a little, spacecraft flying over the top, and it's dropping bombs. And what you see here, they're called little dialectical bombs. And this could be taken all the way back to the esoteric, occult stuff. It could be taken back all the way to the ancient world, to, Neoplatonism and Plato, if we want. But from there, you have the French Revolution, you have Hegel, you have Marx, you have Lenin, you have Mao, Marcuse, and the current neo-Marxism. In the next slide, I simplified it to make a point. Okay, I think I made the point. The dialectic killing cultures 1 century at a time over time. The observation to the slide is, by the time a dialectical attack strikes the target, you see it drops its dialectical load as it flies over. You could think of this as an aircraft flying over dropping ordnance. Okay, but instead of that, it's a dialectical bomb. Okay, it already has moved on to the next target along its trajectory, or the narrative arc. So we simplified this to show the dialectical attack we've been seeing recently. And this is held up really, really well over time. It makes, my impression is it allows people to know this, so that when we get lost in some of the dialectical stuff, because I will apologize, but we just got to hurt your brain. And I guarantee you that if you get it the first time, you're a better person than me and most of the people who saw it, because the first time around, It's strange concepts with language you've never heard about that has been pushed out of our narrative, out of our lexicon. The words that are used to actually define what we're saying, we no longer even use. Just like if you talk to your kids, they don't even know who John Wayne is. I mean, and if they get a class on it, he will be a white supremacist or something like that. So with this one, I'll just go over it. The launch of dialectical attacks precedes their impact, which is when those events are perceived by the uninitiated. So I'll explain uninitiated here in a second. The observation here is logically and often chronologically, when the target audience, you, responds to one attack, the dialectical or Aufheben, this will be explained, Aufheben engine is already releasing its ordnance on the next round. So take a look up here. One of the things we put in writing the week before the presidential election in 2020 was that the impeachment of President Trump succeeded wildly in what was expected. Now you're going to think, well, no, Trump won that. And we're going to say that wasn't the goal. If they had actually succeeded at impeaching him, we could make a good theoretical argument that would have desynchronized a lot of things, but it didn't. What was the goal? Well, if you remember the hearings leading up to the impeachment, the first thing to understand, it was a Ukrainian during the period of the USSR lieutenant colonel released information on the National Security Council when the president was calling for the investigation of activities going on in the Ukraine having to do with American corruption. That was the basis of the impeachment. And one of the things I pointed out was if everything that Trump was accused of were true, that he's committed no crime. He's exercising his Article 2 power as the president of the United States to conduct foreign policy. So why do I say that? Because what the goal of the impeachment was they had star chambers. They literally had Democrats go into the HPSI, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, and did star chamber hearings where nobody was allowed in. And you, the citizen, weren't allowed to have access. And then they had other secret meetings, and the Republicans accepted that. They accepted a completely extra legal forum on which to impeach a president of the United States on charges that, if were true, don't rise to the level of impeachable offense, in my opinion, but I think legally speaking as well. So they knew that the Republicans would accept the narratives, even narratives that were staggeringly unconstitutional, extra legal in the American legal paradigm. Star chambers, hidden chambers, where they had secret hearings. So what you will see is when they launched the impeachment hearing, it actually impacted right around COVID taking off. So there, all of a sudden, we're down on the ground and we're fighting that battle on the ground where you see that little explosion with a plus and minus. No matter who wins that event, they have won because you're fighting in the battle drop. But if you look almost straight up, when you started arguing, when the America started debating the impeachment, is when they launched the COVID lockdown, which impacted later. Now, from our perspective, what happened there was
one
that.
Second, Stephen. I'm gonna interrupt you just really quick. I'm so sorry. We do need to take a quick break, if you don't mind. When we come back, I want to continue this on. I'm sorry because I'm in the middle of thinking of this too, but that cat is so needy. So we'll be right back, sir. Welcome back to the Conservative Continuum. This is incredible information. So get back into gear, put your helmet back on. Let's get ready to engage. Okay, Stephen, you were describing to us about they had impeached the president. They were moving on. They had already started with these Star Chamber secret meetings that had never been done before. So you were moving us into the COVID lockdown.
So the key thing to remember is we're down in that blast area right there, fighting impeachment as they've launched on the COVID lockdown, which is to say, by the time we address the issue they dropped on us, they've already moved on to the next target. So their attack is ahead of our responses. But what will happen is when the COVID lockdown happened, okay, when they launched the COVID lockdown, remember, we put something in writing in March 2000, April. Well, we had it up at the, we shared with people in the White House, the National Security Council, in March 2020, two documents, one called Red Team on COVID, and the other was called, I think, Narrative Dominance on COVID, to warn that the narrative on COVID was disconnected from the actual COVID issue in terms of what type of event it was, in terms of a disease and all that, and that it reflected a mass line. It bore all the resemblance of a mass line enforcement narrative, which for right now we'll say is a Marxist enforcement narrative, and that there was reason to be concerned that this narrative was in furtherance of goals. So what happens with the COVID lockdown is we are all in our house. We are literally, what you want to do when you're going to launch a revolution is have everybody disparate and off in the area, and you hit, and it hits with shock. And what people need to understand is when the COVID narrative, I mean, when the BLM Antifa stuff hit, right? Everybody was literally locked in their homes. And they hit with impunity, and they hit all over the world at the same time. Within days of Minneapolis, they had Floyd riots in Australia. They had them in Ukraine. They had them in London. They had them in Paris. They had them in New York. They had them in San Francisco, and they all were carrying and had the same narrative, same speech lines. They were ready to go. So what happened is when the COVID lockdown hit us is when they launched the BLM Antifa. Once they realized people would stay in their homes, and the Republicans, seeing people forced in their homes on what increasingly became arbitrary decisions that were separated from the actual medical necessity, okay, or arguably that and it should have had a actual hearing because people's civil liberties were at stake. You had the dogs that didn't bark to Republicans remain silent. Okay. And, this is where I think I have an issue with some of my MAGA friends. I don't think that the President Trump should get a complete pass on that, but that's for a different discussion. But you will look up when the COVID when they launched, by the time we're talking about the lockdown in force, they've launched the BLM Antifa raid. So what I want to point out is, so long as we go from one blast to the other, we are always responding to what they launched. And they will always be one or two steps ahead of us. The Ukraine was the next bomb there. What am I talking about? So long as we're responding in that bomb blast, then moving to the next bomb blast, and not looking up and seeing that what we are engaged in the military parlance are point defenses, okay, over a maneuvering target heading across the horizon. Until we shoot down that plane dropping those bombs, they're going to keep us reacting in perpetuity. And so long as we react, you will almost hear every conservative organization that says they have to solve the problem. And they'll say, we don't have time. We don't have time to address the larger issue. We have to respond to this. Well, what you have in that situation is now we're addressing their issue in a deracinated form, meaning we're answering the issue with the language unique to that bomb blast, which means we don't even get the ability to ratchet it up to see it's part of a larger attack, which we'll introduce the term intersectional in this context later on to show that so long as we're responding only to those issues, we're always in reaction mode, and there's no possibility of winning. We can win half those battles. As you could see, they don't care. What they care about is over time, you're fighting so many battles, you get tired. Over time, people just walk away from your cause, and they will then relaunch the same battle again later. So that's what I wanted to do with this graphic. And what I'll do, just to kind of, because you'll hear this come up, is before I move on, we're going to the beginning of this briefing, just finish off a point, and then we're going to go to the dialectic. But do you have any questions on that? Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. And it is, I full transparency, I was watching your video, and it takes a couple times, because now that I'm hearing it again, I'm like, that is absolutely true what's happening. So I'm going to let you speak, because we're with you so far.
So what I want to do here is introduce you to something called the sorcerer circle, because we're going to use the word sorcerer circle. And I want to give you an understanding what we mean. And today, right, as we introduce it now and later, we're going to say maybe we're not being metaphorical. But what I would tell you about what you said from the second time hearing at 24 hours, 46 hours later, is 3 months from now, all of a sudden, a couple of things that you saw as two separate, unrelated things will all of a sudden form, and you see them as a unity. And you'll ask, probably call me or someone else, say, do I see that right? And the answer is, you see it right. Well, why didn't you tell me before? Because until your mind reorders to see these things dialectically, you will still see them the way you want to. And I'll revert to matrix metaphor things, because it just works. And actually, we have a 3-part blog from about a year or two ago on why the matrix explains political warfare. And by the way, this is political warfare, and political warfare is the Maoist insurgency model. And what is the matrix thing of it is? So long as you're thinking in terms of the blue pill world, there's no answers, even though, for example, Neo knew things were wrong. And I'll just continue this for a second. He gets kidnapped, right? He's not allowed to know where he is. All of a sudden, he comes awake, and he's in the presence of Morpheus. Morpheus opens up his hands and says, you could take the red pill or the blue pill. If you take the blue pill, even though we know things are wrong, you'll forget this meeting, you go back to the blue pill world, and we'll leave you alone. And what's he saying? So long as you choose to understand the blue pill, what you see the blue pill as if the blue pill were real, which is what we're going to define as the sorcerer circle, you don't help the cause. You're spinning endlessly, just like those dialectical attacks has you spinning endlessly in their narratives. Okay, if you take the red pill, the first thing you do is you get flushed. Go back to that scene. You're literally flushed out of a fluid incubator, and they try to kill you, because any point where you know the fact of what's going on interferes with the narrative, and narratives are always fictions. So then what happens? He goes through a period of physical recovery, because they have to pull all that stuff out of him. And then he has to be explained what's going on in the real world. And of course, he tells them what you're going to see is terrible. It's terrible. It's as bad as you think it is. It's many times worse. And that's why they have the scene where the one guy says, this is a steak. I know it's gelatinous stuff, but I want to go back. And what's that point? When you see how grim it is, you may decide you had more fun in the Matrix, or you might want to remain in the cave in Plato's Republic. So what I'm going to do is give you this brief introduction, but I'm going to point out that I'm taking this from a man named Coughlin. In about 20 minutes, we're going to go deep into what Coughlin was doing. We'll put it in motion. We'll put it in context. But what does he say about the dialectic? Because, of course, the dialectic does have origins in, we'll call them esoteric worldviews, okay? And we'll leave it at that for now. So Eric Vogelin was one of the most prestigious conservative American political philosophy thinkers. He taught at Stanford when it was still conservative, and at the Hoover Institute. So his bona fides in that area are pretty good. So I take this from a piece he wrote. It's called Hegel, A Study in Sorcery. And all I'll say right now is he writes this so that you can think that he means that Hegel, he refers to Hegel metaphorically as a sorcerer. And what I get people to understand is he's not being metaphorical. He is basically saying, in the worldview of Hegel, the people who did what he did were sorcerers, and he considered himself one. Now, we'll move on from that. But what does he say here? The movement of dialectical knowledge is the circle that runs back into itself, presupposing the beginning. It reaches in the end. Once you have entered the magic circle the sorcerer has drawn around himself, you are lost. You're in the matrix, okay? And yet the attack on the dignity of man really occurs because Hegel intends his construction not to be a private assessment, but an eminently public proclamation of the scientific truth about the reality of man and society and history. And he goes on, and I show you that this is where we're putting what he has here and how we're going to structure this with the dialectic in a minute. So you see what happens is in that circle, the pseudo-reality is formed. The target is contained, and you're in, for example, the matrix metaphor, the blue pill world. Okay, the movement of the dialectical knowledge is the circle that runs back into itself. Do you see the oberos there? That's what's being referred to, and that's what it means. And some of you might say, I've seen that on tattoos a lot, but what you should know is that's an esoteric symbol. Okay, a non-Judeo-Christian one, we could say. So once you have entered the magic circle the sorcerer has drawn around you, you are lost. Well, that's a depiction of the sorcerer circle, and that looks a little, I don't know, alchemical, hermetic, okay? Excuse me. And yet the attack on dignity. So I want you to see that, because what we're looking at is, you see that dialectical engine dropping, it's flying over the, on the bottom right, the dialectical engine, dropping dialectical attacks. Well, we're gonna end the first part of this on that picture with the two men playing checkers at the top there. The dialectic is not a two. I'm sorry. The dialectic is not a flat two-dimensional concept that operates horizontally on a static plane. And what you have here is a dialectical attack in the middle, and you have the positive charge, think of that as thesis, and you have the negative charge, think of that as antithesis. And as they spin, okay, as they spin around that dialectical attack, everybody inside it is captured by it. There's actually laws of magnetics, actual physics, that gives an explanation for that. So we're going to go from, we're going to start looking at this more closely. Okay.
We're going to,
yes?
real quick, before we start going into that deeply, we're going to take a really quick break, and then we're going to come right back. Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay. Be right back. Don't go away. Welcome back to the Conservative Continuum. I am your host, Mick Meow. Please go to patreon.com/Mick Meow to become a sponsor today. Stephen, when we left off, you were moving us forward. You were just getting to that point where you were starting to talk about that dialectical attack. I just want to ask you one quick question, if I may. One of the things that you were talking about as you were going through is almost like people are getting that helplessness, that theory of helplessness. Is that right? I mean, that's how I see people handling this right now. There's so much coming at them. They're bombarding them. It's overwhelming them, and that's the plan.
Yes. Now, what will happen is this right here is explaining how dialectics attacks work, and we'll stop in a moment, not all the way through this, so people can see what they're seeing, and then we're to join that brief and show you exactly, give you a sense for exactly how that works. How's that?
Perfect.
Exactly.
Perfect.
And I think that when people see it, one of the big things that my epiphany is that these concepts are better as visualizations than they are as narratives that you write in paper. I mean, if you write it, it takes much more effort to explain it than to see it. Think about having to writing with no pictures what a square is and making it technically correct. That could take 2 pages, right? Okay. But if someone sees a square, boom, they don't need anything more. And one of the key things I would like people to think about is, think of Marxism and this very dialectical concept as something where it's more like a football player's playbook, where the only narrative is the stuff on the bottom that explains the X's and O's on the top. And there's no philosophy really, there's just execution. Does that work?
Yes, I like it.
So here we're going to go show a couple things, because the whole point here is that people think that when you're fighting a dialectical attack, it's like playing checkers on a 2-dimensional plane. And here's just a picture of the solar system moving through the solar system. And actually, and there's going to be a better one that comes up, is what it actually is happening is the solar system is moving through space heliolytically, and the planets rotate heliolytically around it. It's actually a 3-dimensional form. So if we just stop that and show this, what we'll do is we'll just isolate on the sun and 2 planets revolving around it. And then we'll say it's as easy as just converting that to the narrative. Transition to visualization to a mass line narrative with 2 opposing poles that exist to contain people in a narrative. So the binary is one is thesis and antithesis. And this is very simple. But you see, once they're circling, you have a containment field, and you contain people in them, which it looks a lot more purple, right? It should be purple because once they circle around themselves fast enough, that's the color you see. This contains the opposition from both sides within the binary field, and hence the field is purple. The targeted demographic, including the opposition within that demographic, is contained. An opposition that is contained is a controlled opposition. Now, I'm going quickly through this because I just want people to have this visualization. In the matrix metaphor, contained targets are captured blue pill players. That's how that goes. The pseudo reality is formed. Everything in there, even the data in there, if it's true, is true in the pseudo reality. So that would be the true points explained incorrectly. Trapped in the constructed pseudo-reality, the narratives that attract them, and the binary fields that hold them. So we're going to give the bluff. That's the bottom line up front. So I need to remove that second F. Okay, but we'll give you the words as we roll through this. So we could use a couple issues. We could use a theological one, or we could use election reform. Okay, so you see somebody inside that blue pill world. Now, because we're going to talk about these as binary attacks, let's just assume that this is people are trapped in there. We're just going to talk about the positive charge. We could say maybe those are leaders in the Republican Party, or maybe even, I don't know, Fox News. Okay, now, the red one would be MSNBC, but we took that out for now to just narrow in on something. What do you see? You see people inside that narrative who look and see outside the narrative, and they see, boom, something that really happened. Does this make sense? Are you following?
Yep.
It really happened. We'll say election campaign reform here. So what happens is all of a sudden people are scrambling because they have to get people to stop looking at those real things, because if they really keep looking at those real things long enough, they might figure something out. So controlled oppositions, because we're isolating on one thing. The set of targets in a dialectical negation line of operation that clusters around a pole thesis that operates in conjunction with an opposing pole, the antithesis, as part of a constructed binary. The attracting pole is designed to attract and contain the target so as to fix it for the purpose of negating it as part of a larger intersectional line of effort. The pole exists for the sole purpose of negating the target it attracts. So we'll say, let's just say maybe Fox is holding them there. Does that make sense? And people see
Yes.
it. Okay. So what happens is you put a boundary inside the circle and outside the circle to deflect what you actually saw. And inside is a mirage of the outside circle. And now, through sleight of hand, you're no longer looking at what really happened. You're looking at what was given you there. Make sense?
Yes. Yep.
And now the whole discussion is about that, including the blue side, friendly side, giving you narratives that don't convert to reality, and the left that says you shouldn't talk about it at all. But we're not leaving the left in here right now. So the attracting friendly pole in the binary, because we're just doing the blue here, right? The attracting friendly pole in the binary is purpose-built. They're built for this purpose, is purpose-built to emulate the real beliefs of the attracted target, which are then replicated inside a contained pseudo-real construct that facilitates the ongoing manipulation of the target through a programmed period of praxis. Period of praxis will be a term we'll introduce, designed for that purpose, all the while imperceptibly escalating and intensifying the complete deracination of the target set from the reality of its own beliefs. Deracination is a big term for us. Deracination means you take something that's real and it belongs in a real environment, and you separate it from its real environment, and then you attack it, and you associate with new words that doesn't give us the ability to understand something. To separate something from its organic reality is the first step in destroying it, right? You'll see this. These dialectical events are called dialogues. And it's important to point out that the word dialogue in Greek is associated with the word dialectic, and in its original use, and still in certain circles. I mean, we say dialogue, we think we're talking about conversation. And generically, it can mean that. But in fact, its real meaning is a dialogue is a dialectical event. Every dialectical event seeks to get you to move off a point. Think of it like this. The most destructive dialectical event for Republicans, people who vote Republicans, is when they have a primary or when they have a caucus and they agree on a platform and they even agree on a candidate. And the first thing that happens after they have that caucus is the Republican Party says, now we have to move to the middle. Well, what did they do? They just fixed you in your narrative, what you agreed to on the platform, but in saying they have to move to the middle, they just negated it. And they've been doing this for 40 years. Do you find that interesting?
Yes. Yes. And
Okay.
and it's making sense because you can, you're saying it, but you can see it.
In this construct, right?
Yes.
So then what happens after they have you completely fixed on their mirage is they shift it down. Okay. So if the mirage goes away, there's nothing behind it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So there's nothing to see. Now all of a sudden it's voter integrity or whatever they want to call it. Okay. Then you bring in the left. MSNBC comes in and they say, hey, come on, guys. You've been investigating this and investigating. There's nothing here. And what does Fox say? We just got to get beyond this. We have to move beyond. Do you see how that works, tongue and groove?
Yes, absolutely. And it's exactly what you're hearing. It's exactly what you're hearing right now.
Remember, I showed you before we started this video because of the technology of this platform. Is our motto is stop seeing what you know and start knowing what you see. And that's exactly what we meant. This kind of gives you a real picture. It just gives you a coherent way to understand it. So that funny thing about sorcerer circle is now not so funny anymore, is it?
No. We and
So
I want to take a really quick break. We have to take a really quick break. I hate to do it because I am so wrapped up, and I know you all are too. But we're going to be right back. I promise. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the Conservative Continuum. I am your host, Mick Meow. We are here with Stephen Coughlin, and we are talking about dialectics. And you were getting to that point where you were showing us this. If you all can see that on your screen, that pseudo reality and how those dialectics are being formed. So, Stephen, I'm handing it back to you. Lead us.
thank you. Thank you, Mick. So what you see here is it's negated. You know, a popular Latin way of explaining this, or the Latin way of explaining this, the dialectic, is solve et coagula. And now go do a word search on solve et coagula on Google, and then look at images. And then one of the things you'll see is it's tattooed on somebody's hand, and just go click on that and see what the story's about. I'm not going to say anything more. So it is at this point where a basket of culture-defining beliefs have been reduced to a series of attack binaries and integrated into an attack matrix. That's what intersectionality is. That the process of cultural negation is in full motion, with two mutually supporting poles always reinforcing the attack. So this is just recapping it, but what I wanted to do was show you this is a different way of seeing that same thing. This is what you see a picture of the solar system, and it's a flat two-dimensional plane with them going around the planet, going around the sun. But this is what you really see. And in that same instance, that's what a dialectical attack is. And with that, all I really want to do, I only wanted to introduce this before we went into the main brief. And I know I went long on this, so I apologize. But I think that when I then refer to the sorcerer circle, you're going to know there's something to this. And that is pre. Do you have me back up?
Yep.
So I want to show you something here really quick. This is the original build, and this is how big the main brief is. And we have at least as many for the build. So this is going to be a course. But what we're going to do now is I'm going to introduce you to the dialectic here, and it's going to be designed to answer the very question you asked about being in a state of confusion. In fact, this is designed to do that before we go into specific Marxist attack. But the other goal of this piece will be to show that Marxists actually key on these things, that it's not new to them. And the code name for this, you see it in Greek in the background, dialogos k praxis, dialogue and praxis. And in fact, what did Gramsci call Marxism? the philosophy of praxis. What is a dialogue? It's an event to negate something. So, here's the fair use. Here are the pieces of this brief so far. We don't need to do that. But here's a quote, and it's a quote that we really focus on from Joseph Piper. And I want people to understand it. Let's see if okay. And I actually have, I'm trying to think of his name. The Soviet KGB officer who came to America, who defected after going to Canada. Oh, you know his name, to show this is exactly in line with this piece. So what does Joseph Pieper say? He says, abuse of language, abuse of power. And he basically explains how the Nazis did what they did and how the Soviets were doing what they were doing, explaining it exclusively along the Plato's dialogues. And his key point was everything you're seeing, including the things you think might not be what you think I'm talking about. That too, okay? Everything you're seeing can be explained completely by those Platonic dialogues, but there's a different way to interpret them. So what's the quote? The sophists, Plato says, fabricate a fictitious reality. That the existential realm of man could be taken over by pseudo-realities whose fictitious natures threaten to become indiscernible is truly a depressing thought. And yet the Platonic nightmare, I hold, possesses an alarming contemporary relevance, for the general public is being reduced to a state where people, Besmanov, by the way, where people are not only unable to find out about the truth, but also become able to search for the truth because they are satisfied with deception and trickery and have determined what their convictions have determined their convictions, satisfied with a fictitious reality created by design through the abuse of language. You've heard that quote before?
No, but that hits home. That is incredible because it sums up exactly what I keep seeing over and over and over and over.
Yes. So
I actually saw it, but I saw it on your video. But it hits home.
So that book is only 55 pages long. So what I'd like to point out is, what is the Platonic nightmare? And there is a man, Ficino, who the Medici sent to Constantinople to go get the Greek language dialogues from Plato. Now, what people don't realize is he brought them back in 1465. They got translated, and they became so popular that they stole the show. Now, you might think of what is Plato today, and you think of the Republic, you think of the Timaeus. But if you take a look, this is 1510, let's just say. It's a classic painting that was initiated in the Vatican by Pope Julius. It's called The School of Athens. And what is the book that Plato is holding? It's the Timaeus. Now, when Ficino brought the Timaeus over at the direction of the Medici, it was brought over with another book called the Hermeticum. And so what we're getting at is there is an esoteric way to understand it, and it's never taught. So what we have for our bluff, bottom line up front, actions on contact. What do you do? That's a military phrase. Actions on contact. You make contact with the enemy. What do you do without thinking? Drill, drill, drill. What are the things you do? Because of course, if you stand up there while people are shooting at you, you'll be shot. So you hear a gunshot, boom, do this, then do that, do then this, and return fire. So identify the binary. Remember we talked about two poles? Binaries are created for the purpose of pitting a reality against a pseudo-reality that they make up. That's intersectionality. So the reality can be negated. Identify the negatively defined pseudo-real attributes and personas to determine what real attributes and classes of people they target. Define the real, attack the pseudo-real, and then try to establish a breakout. When you're in contact with when you realize you're in a dialectical narrative, never, ever, ever, I'm going to use this phrase, say that you're going to jujitsu them, beat them at their own game, because that's when you are trapped in their narrative and you cannot win. Make sense? So here is a key quote we like to use, and it's going to become a bigger quote when we do the next build on this. This is a book written in 1884 in London called Contemporary Socialism. And in that book, it quotes a book called Secret Societies in Switzerland. And I want to give you the quote because a key point here is Marxism is a product of secret societies that existed in Europe at the time. And this is something that is no longer taught, okay, about Marxism or other movements. The masses can only, this is not Marxism, by the way, this is from a secret society. The masses can only be gathered under the flag of negation. When you present detailed plans, you excite controversies and sow division. We're seeing that happening. We're seeing excitement, controversies that excite people and create divisions. That's called mass line narrative development under Mao. We are content to lay down the foundation of the revolution. We shall have deserved well of it if we stir hatred and contempt against all existing institutions. We make war against all prevailing ideas of religion, of the state, of country, of patriotism. The idea of God is the keystone of a perverted civilization. It must be destroyed. The true root of liberty, of equality, of culture is atheism. A revolution is never made. It makes itself. So what I'm pointing out here with this 1884 quote from an 1840s book, lining it up with Karl Marx, is that this concept was much larger than Marxism, and arguably it still is. So now we'll go to a book called Unrestricted Warfare. Unrestricted Warfare is a translation of a thesis at the People's Republican Army War College by two Chinese colonels. And what do they say in that paper in 1999? Whether it be the intrusion of hackers, a major explosion at the World Trade Center, or a bombing attack by bin Laden. By the way, 9/11 was 2 years out from this writing.
Okay, I was going to say that. I was going to say that was before 9/11. Sorry. I'm sorry. I just noticed that too. I was like, wait, that was before 9/11.
Oh no, say what you think. I think go ahead.
Oh no, I was just noticing that too, that here it is. It's like they're telling you what's going to happen,
Well, let me say this. I got to be very careful.
Okay.
I am not saying that the Chinese had some role in 9/11 because I don't think I don't know that there's any evidence, and I'm not looking for it. What I'm saying is our national security establishment is so ignorant of political warfare that they're incapable of seeing what other countries saw so clearly, that 9/11 was foreseeable in a way that should have been foreseeable to us. And that's why we'll finish this quote. Ready?
Yes, sir.
This is their assessment, and it's still operative. Whether it be the intrusion of hackers, a major explosion at the World Trade Center, or a bombing attack by bin Laden, all of these greatly exceed the frequency bandwidth understood by the American military. This is because they have never taken into consideration and have even refused to consider means other than that are contrary to tradition and to select measures of operation other than military means. What are the Chinese saying here? What does the world know about America? That they have no concept of political warfare. And you can destroy America using political warfare as the means of attack. Now, I have an introductory briefing on political warfare.
We're going to take
That's separate from this.
We're going to take a really quick other break. One more break. We got it. That cat, he constantly needs to break. But we're going to be right back, sir. Don't go away.
You bet.
Welcome back to the Conservative Continuum. Thank you to our sponsors, and please go to patreon.com/McMeow. Okay, so you were giving us this information, and that is amazing. I hadn't thought about that, and shame on me, but that our military, our Department of Defense, in America, we're just not able to see it. We're just running from one to the other. We're not looking. We're not able to forecast ahead. Maybe that's the wrong word to say, but I just wanted you to know that that's an interesting concept. I hadn't thought of that they talked about that back in 1999.
Well, the former partner at Unconstrained Analytics was Rich Higgins. And Rich Higgins not only graduated from the National Defense University, but he taught the course on political warfare. And one of the things that really bothered him is that they were willing to do the full political warfare class for foreign officers, and they weren't allowed to teach it to U.S. military officers. And that was always something that has bothered people. Unrestricted warfare is a political warfare. I wrote that wrong. Is political warfare. How's that? So let's go to Marx. Lenin, and we have a quote. Now over here, I have the complete works of Lenin that were published in the Soviet Union, and I'm taking it from this book. I show you all the pages, and then I have the quote above, so you could see that even my highlighting in itself is the highlighting that you see in the text. So why is the dialectic so important? Why is, if you don't understand the dialectic, our point is, if you don't understand the dialectic and you're fighting Marxism, you are actually building their narrative. You are a piece in their narrative, and you're batting for them. That's how strong we're making the statement. But here's the quote from Marx. Dialectic is the theory of knowledge of Hegel and Marxism. This is the aspect of the matter. It is not an aspect, but the essence of the matter. So what is he saying? Everything about what we're doing is dialectically driven. Remember the aircraft flying over above, dropping dialectical bombs? We are always focusing on the blast zone. We never, ever, ever focus on the plane dropping the bomb. And what do? We go from one blast zone to the next blast zone to the next blast zone. But if they're always dropping their next bomb, when we start to address the one they dropped before, guess what that means? It means they control everything about what you're doing, including your response. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
So this is, my daughter said this is hokey, so I'll change that. The way this is, we're going to call it the Wizard and the Grimoire, and this piece will end, and this is the most difficult piece to get your mind around. It's called the Wizard's Grimoire, and that, of course, is a picture of Hegel. It's the archetype form, and we're going to introduce you to the three-pronged attack. But when we get out of here, we'll kind of point to the fact that maybe it's the things that, because we didn't know that Wilson was the first pure Hegelian president, we didn't maybe understand he talked in code, okay? And that we will get now an understanding of what really it means. But the other part of it is, we'll see from this piece why people are demoralized, but it will hurt your brain. You ready to go?
Ready.
We're going back to that book on Hegel, A Study in Sorcery. Vogelin called Hegel a sorcerer, and his philosophy a grimoire, which is a book of incantations and spells. When doing so, he was more serious than some people might think. Of course, you've already seen this quote. What I showed you at the beginning is really going to be back integrated into this. Once you have entered the magic circle the sorcerer has drawn around himself, you are lost. He's talking about this in the context of Hegel, which is what Marxism adopted, which is what Marx adopted, which is what Marxism adopted. So you see the tight fit here? They're operating on this concept of the sorcerer's circle. The substance becomes the please understand that if you have to stop the video and read this a couple times, I get it. So if you want to laugh at that too, go right ahead.
But no, I have to stop it.
The substance becomes the subject, and the subject the substance in the process of a consciousness that is immanent to itself. Of course, Hegel does not state his principle of construction as badly as I have done now, or the enterprise of his grimoire would be self-defeating. We're going to come up with a money quote on this from another philosopher. The reader would just, and it's going to be a key to understanding how to attack Marxism. The reader would justly ask what a consciousness that is nobody's consciousness could possibly be. It's nothing. Remember, it's a negation. The difficulties are exemplified, make it impossible to understand the purpose of the grimoire without a code at hand that will permit the decipherment page after page. And what I point out here is grimoires have a code, and where there are codes, there are keys. So let's just take a departure here. This concept can be taken all the way back to the Acts of the Apostles, because the word practice is actually praxis, okay? Many of those who are now believers came confessing and divulging their practices, and a number of those who practiced magic arts brought their books together and burned them in the sight of all. And they counted the value of them and found it came to 50,000 pieces of silver. That is an enormous amount of money in the ancient world. So those books are what Vogelin called grimoires. And this is just a picture of the Roman Emperor Diocletian. And the only thing to understand here is that he was going after people who involved themselves in these type of activities. So now we get to Schopenhauer, who was a contemporary of Hegel. And it's very clear that German philosophers at the time who were not a part of the Hegelian worldview detested him. So he said things like, here then is the origin of the philosophical method which appears immediately after Kant, and which is made up of claptrap, of mystification, of imposture, of deception, throwing dust in the eyes. This is his discussion of Hegel. This is the period of dishonesty. So what is he saying? I mean the stupid and clumsy charlatan Hegel, endless, and talking about the endless and the absolute. So people realized in its time, German philosophers who you might not like, okay, still recognize there's something enormously dangerous about this. So what did Marx say about Hegel? And of course, you see me taking this. We focus on the young Hegel, not the old Hegel, okay? And we're going to argue that the young Hegel is the one that you should focus on, to the exclusion, if necessary, the old Hegel. So what did he say? In this passage, the logical pantheistic mysticism appears very clearly. The pantheistic mysticism of who? Hegel. This is obvious mystification. This pantheistic mystification, mystical substance, mystical idea. So did Marx know that Hegel's philosophy was actually a metaphysical worldview? He absolutely knew. Here we have Lenin. Hegel dilates at length on Plato's philosophy of nature. The ultra-nonsensical mysticism. Triangles form the essence of sensuous things. Such mystical nonsense. The mystical idea of spiritualist Hegel. Mysticism, mystical slush. So did Lenin understand that the dialectic was based on mystical claims? He absolutely did. Did he make fun of it as he adopted it in whole? He absolutely did, as Marx did, as Mao did. Okay, so here we come to Bertrand Russell, who, if you do some research, you'll find trended to the left. Vogelin, conservative. I kind of want people to understand that on both right and left, people understood this was dangerous stuff. But here we come to a key quote here that I want you to remember whenever you're listening to people talk philosophically about Hegel. But because Marxism copies Hegel, anything Marxist. And it's going to especially include how you understand or seek to understand what? Black Lives Matter or any other intersectional line of attack. Hegel's philosophy is so odd that one would not have expected him to be able to get sane men to accept it. But he did. He set out with so much obscurity that people thought it must be profound. It can easily expound it lucidly in words of one syllable, but then its absurdity would become obvious. That's a key. It is so big and so wordy that people allow themselves to get lost in the salad. Half the people who say they read it didn't, or started and got confused. But because the team says this is what they're doing, you're supposed to be awestruck, people say, I read it. Did you read it? Did you get it? You know, there's some jokes about this. But the key is, as I say here, all those initiate-laden terms. What is an initiate? The person who understands there's code in what we're saying. And what's the uninitiated? Everybody else. I'll give you an example. When they said it was a peaceful protest, the initiated knew that that was the mayor of Minneapolis, that was the Attorney General Ellison of Minnesota, that was the governor of Minnesota saying, we deem you're writing a peaceful protest. Oh, and people who protest against you or try to strike you down or get you away from their burning house, keep you from burning them down, we'll treat them as the non-peaceful actors. And of course, then when BLM and Antifa are attacking the White House, and there's a question about whether they might mobilize military units to put down that revolt because there was a genuine concern of overrunning the White House, you heard the Joint Chief of Staff call it a peaceful protest. And there were some who wondered whether that was a declaration of mutiny. Okay, so do you see how the initiates understood what it meant? And you just said, that's silly. Why would they say that? Do you see the difference?
Yeah, I do. It sounds crazy when, and I don't mean to get off the point here. Maybe I am off the point and we'll take a quick break, but it was silly to see what was going on and to hear the words that they were saying, peaceful protest, but the buildings were being burned down and the people were being, beaten with skateboards in the street. It was such a disconnect, but so many people bought into it.
But does it make sense? Oh, well, does it make sense now?
Yes. Yes.
So let me finish the slide before you break so we can just go to the next one.
Okay.
All I want to say is, here's the key. Over-engineered initiate language is an indicator that complexity may be a smokescreen for the absurd. Okay. But, you did have that initiate language, and we're going to basically argue along those lines for other things. But if you need to go to break, we're ready.
Yeah. We'll take a quick break. We're going to be right back. Don't go away. You guys, very important. Come right back. Get that snack later. Welcome back to the Conservative Continuum, everybody. Stay with us. Don't meander off. This is important. And I tell you, he did warn us we were going to have some brain bulging going on there, but it's good brain bulging. We need to hear it. I'm handing it back to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mick. And I'm going to tell you, this is the part that hurts the brain the most, what we're coming up on. But I'm telling you, once you master this, everything becomes simple afterwards. Now, that doesn't mean after this briefing, because you're going to have to take a couple bites at this a couple times. And then it will, this kind of makes your brain reorder itself over a couple months. So you intellectually can get it early, but your brain goes through a reordering of now what you're seeing, because our goal is to get people to stop seeing what they know and start knowing what they see. That's going to be our new slogan, by the way.
I'm gonna write that in when we send out our comments of this show. I'm writing that out there because that's.
And I'm sorry, I have a cold, so I kind of
Oh no, you're wonderful. I'd hand you some water, but we're.
So remember you asked about the confusion and stuff?
Yes.
This is the part, the three-tiered attack, where we bring this up. And we
Okay.
have to explain some concepts. And in fact, our next build will take these concepts that are still complicated when we end here and ground them so that you can get to the easy side. Because the idea here is this stuff is hard to take in, but once you get to the other side of the equation, everything becomes enormously simple. And you're not going to understand how much you get it until something happens. And so say, well, how do you explain that? And you explain it to people you've always worked with, and they look at you funny and say, what are you talking about? Oh, it's as plain as the nose on your face, you'll say. And then someone like me will have to do, as I have to a couple people I brought onto this, say, dude, you didn't know this until I showed it to you. But it's plain. It wasn't plain before. And so that goes to the whole sorcerer circle thing. Make sense?
Yes.
So
true.
here we have science of reason. This is going to be very important. And it's going to be grounded in Plato in the new iteration so people can see. But science of reason executes by building towards an end state idealized as a future perfect world. We'll make this clear in a couple minutes. So, ready? Here you have the future perfect world, you have the dialectic, and you have the state as God. So up at the top is we have science of reason, which we now call the perfect future world, because that's how Marxism deals with it. It's also how the Hegel dealt with it. Fair enough?
Yes.
So the dialectic is it's a three-pronged attack. The dialectic is the grimoire of incantations and spells. And what you see is it reinforces the concept that the state is God, and it reinforces the idea of the future perfect God, the perfect future world, excuse me, right? So for this presentation, the dialectic is the manufacturing of binaries to position real cultural or personal values, beliefs, traits, norms, etc., against constructed opposites. They're made up opposites, tailored to characterize those values, beliefs, traits, norms, etc., and they're characterized in odious negative terms, leading to their abandonment and destruction through negation. Because it is a constructed opposite, it is pseudo-real, a part of the backdrop narrative, the blue pill construct. Binaries also seek the subordination of real science to pseudoscience. Okay? Make sense? And we're going to read, we're going to burrow down on that. So in this construct, right? Rights endowed by the creator, we're now on the state. And the state is what? The state is God. God bestriding the land. That's almost a quote from Hegel. Okay? Now, the COVID lockdown was an absolute example of this. Rights, and by the way, this was created before the I guess, maybe early in the phase of the lockdown. Rights endowed by the creator in this construct transition to privileges granted by the state by operation of the dialectical process over time. So do you see the state as God supports the dialectic and it supports the future perfect world. Fair enough?
Yes.
By the way, what we're constructing in a different analogy is a different way to understand the sorcerer's circle. So let's go right into Hegel so we can understand this. In his The Philosophy of Right, written in 1820, the state is the actuality of the ethical idea. It is ethical mind qua substantial will manifested, revealed to itself, knowing and thinking itself. What is the only entity in the Judeo-Christian world is the self-thinking thought? God. Right?
Yeah.
Explained.
Yes.
Okay. The state is absolutely rational inasmuch as it is the actuality of the substantial will, which it possesses in the particular self-consciousness once that consciousness has been raised to consciousness of its universality. This substantial unity is an absolute unmoved end in itself, in which freedom comes into its supreme right. On the other hand, this final end has supreme right against the individual, whose supreme duty is to be a member of the state. So again, This concept of the absolute unmoved mover, you could take that right to Thomas Aquinas. The unmoved mover, the uncaused cause is God, right? So you see how Hegel is doing this. He was not a Marxist, right? So, but take a look at that statement. On the other hand, if the state is the living manifestation of God in the world, then the state creates your rights, doesn't it? And you must be absolutely obedient to the state. Fair enough?
Yeah.
Do you see how this is working?
Yes.
But then the First Amendment has no meaning if the state becomes Hegelian. Because rights endowed by the Creator are the privileges that the state give you, and a construct that thinks that the state is God. It collapses the meaning.
Wow.
What do you think about that? Okay.
Yes, and it's it's when you explain it, when you see it, it's what you're seeing. It's what you're seeing today, because all First Amendment rights are being vanished. They're being wiped out. You have to give loyalty.
And we're going to get to something more precise on that, what you're saying, but you're exactly correct. But, as right as you are, I'm going to take it an inch further in about 2 or 3 minutes, and you're saying, oh my gosh, that is exactly what we're saying. Fair enough? See from all this weird Hegelian language, when we pick out the pieces, it's existential and it's danger to the constitutional process of America. That we will say Woodrow Wilson successfully implemented when he was president. So then finally, just to make it clear in his philosophy of history, for truth is the unity of the universal and subjective will. And the universal is to be found in the state, in its laws, its universal and rational arrangement. The state is the divine idea as it exists on earth. So when Germany was unifying, they looked at Hegel and said, we like your concepts and we want to unify Germany around your views, because and I'm skipping something here, but being a good Christian in a Hegelian state means you have to be absolutely obedient to the king. Make sense? To the Kaiser. And that's why before Hispanics started coming into America, the largest group of immigrants were German Jews, German Reformed Church, German Lutherans, and German Catholics. All the Midwest, there was a move to think about making German the national language of America around 1905. People forget that. So now here we are with Woodrow Wilson. This is a little segue. What are the consequences if the state is God? What are the consequences when a nation that claims rights endowed by the Creator come under the governing principles that hold that the state is God bestriding the land? Well, it means that the state controls your rights. But the First Amendment was written precisely to not have that happen. Fair enough? So here is a biography, some quotes from a biography by Pestrito. By far the most important direction which Wilson's thought developed was its adoption of Hegelianism. Wilson studied Hegel and was well aware of his antipathy of Newton. This is very important because there's an homage to Hegel in some of Woodrow Wilson's writings, and it's by reference to Newton. What was Newton? Newton was a real scientist. And what did in the Hegelian language, what we would call a real scientist was someone who was engaged in the science of understanding. And what did Hegel say? The science of understanding is subordinated to the science of reason as defined by Hegel. So what does that mean? It means effectively that Hegel's metaphysical claims are higher in the order of knowledge than scientific claims. So here you see a book written by Woodrow Wilson when he was running for president, called The New Freedom, a call for the emancipation of the generous energies of a people. A people, think about that, 1913. But if you are in the United States and the Constitution exists to defend the Bill of Rights and freedom, wouldn't the new freedom possibly have the effect of overwriting the old freedoms if you're dialectical? Think about that. So let's see here. We're going to quote Hegel so you get a sense for why he dislikes Newton. And this becomes important to understand what Wilson said. According to the familiar Newtonian theory, white or colorless light consists of 5 or 7 colors. The theory itself cannot say exactly how many. One cannot express oneself strongly enough about the barbarism, in the first place, of the conception that with light, too, the worst form of reflection, the compound, was seized upon so that the brightness here could consist of 7 darknesses. Further, the ineptitude, the tastelessness, even dishonesty of Newton's observations and experimentations must be addressed, as well as the equally bad tendency to draw inferences and conclusions and proofs from impure empirical data. Moreover, the blindness of admiration given to Newton's work for nearly 150 centuries must be noted. The narrow-mindedness, the sheer narrow-mindedness of those admirers who defend his conceptions. Finally, there is the blindness of the prejudice that the theory rests on something mathematical. So do you see that the total loathing of Hegel about what we would call today real science? Fair enough?
Yes.
Hegel reviled Newton for his scientific breakthroughs in what he considered the inferior realm of the science of understanding. What I hold out here is this will explain what you saw with the lockdown, and it will explain it in whole. So, by definition, Wilson's new freedoms broke from the old freedoms ensconced in the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. That's fair.
One moment. I think we've got you. Are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay, there we go. There we go. We're back. We're back.
Did you lose me?
Just for a moment. Welcome back to the Conservative Continuum. We got readjusted. We're back on track. Okay. Can you repeat that for me, sir?
So I'll say to the next slide, this is consequences 3. By definition, Wilson's new freedoms broke from the old freedoms ensconced in the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Would you agree?
Yes.
So here we're going to take something out of his stump speech from 1912. The law of gravitation was who? Newton, right? The law of gravity?
Yes. Yes.
Do you remember from your history classes and stuff like that? The apple fell on Newton's head, so the story goes?
Yes.
Because this means he's doing an homage to Hegel by way of attacking Newton. So Woodrow Wilson says the Constitution was founded on the law of gravitation. The government was to exist and move by virtue of the efficacy of checks and balances. The trouble with the theory is that the government is not a machine, but a living thing. It falls not under the law of the universe, but under the law of organic life. It is accountable to Darwin, not to Newton. It is modified by its environment, necessitated by its task, shaped by the sheer pressure of life. So when the state becomes God, Rights endowed by the Creator end up being converted into privileges granted by the state. Under the rubric of group rights are positioned to dialectically oppose constitutionally protected individual rights so as to negate them. So what you should understand is every time a group right is claimed, it is designed to destroy a individual right. What is the Constitution designed to do? Protect individual rights. So every time the Supreme Court rules on a group right over an individual right, they are effectively negating the Constitution. Now, is that not an incantation? Is that not a spell? If you brought this up to people, would they deny it because they're completely caught off guard?
Right. And
you see the keys to this language? Let's see. It's just as simple. You cannot understand what Wilson was saying without recognizing its direct nexus to Hegel. You can't. Privileges granted by the state become institutionalized preferences. So, living constitutions. Have you heard the phrase living constitution?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Living constitution goes directly and immediately to the Hegelian understanding of the living constitution, which conforms to the laws of Darwin. Living constitutions are dialectical. By operation of the dialectic, living constitution interpretations are designed to negate the object of what is interpreted. And it's been that way in the United States since 1914. So let's take a look at this quote from his book, New Freedom. This is not theory, but fact. Notice that this is actually not fact. Okay, this is not theory, but fact, and displays its force as fact. Whatever theories may be thrown across its track, living political constitutions must be Darwinian in structure and in practice. Society is a living organism and must obey the laws of life, not of mechanics. It must develop. The mechanics being the laws of gravity, like Newton. All that progressive ask or desire is permission. In an era where development, evolution is the scientific word, to interpret the Constitution according to Darwinian principle. All they ask is recognition of the fact that a nation is a living thing and not a machine. So, outside the domain of the biological sciences, and from the beginning, the term evolution, development, and Darwinian have always served to mask the dialectical process they instantiate in culture in the name of science, which we're going to point out is not science. So isn't this a grimoire, an incantation? People believe it. So we're back here, and we're going to develop that concept of science of reason. Science of reason, that's the future perfect world as we're going to show it, imposes metaphysics and calls it a science. Fair enough?
Yes.
And it takes priority over what we would call science. So science of reason is not science, it's a metaphysic that exists to instantiate arbitrary state authority. So you see that all three of these are centers of gravity for Marxism, and all three of them reinforce each other. Declaring the opposition to be unscientific and therefore defective for not accepting the science. This is the basis of ridicule. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Because they can claim their political views as scientifically grounded, if you disagree, you're stupid. Because you're stupid, you don't have to be respected. And in fact, if you want to follow a Darwinian concept, maybe, you don't deserve to be treated like a human. Fair? Do you see that?
Yes. Yes, I do. Yep. And it's exactly what happened during the COVID lockdown. Exactly.
What's happened since Hegel.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Here's the science of reason. The science of reason imposes replacement metaphysical claims by designating them science while demanding the Hegelian God, the state, enforce them. This is done through the creation, control, and enforcement of contrived, perfect future worlds that obligates current generations to impose and enforce personal and cultural transformations, change, to ensure that perfect future world is attained. Along with the ideation of the perfect future world, the metaphysical claim that supports actions taken to realize that end state are designated as scientifically valid. Because it is a scientific worldview, resistance is irrational, and right-thinking leaders are under some responsibility to obligate the state to enforce actions leading to the realization of that future perfect end state. I have this little thing here for a build-out that we're going to show how this lines up with the countering violent extremism narrative that was put in place in the name of fighting the war on terror. Make sense?
Yes. Yep.
Hegel believed what is commonly called science, concepts arising from scientific method and falsifiability, to be an inferior form of science that he labeled science of understanding. Hegel disliked Newton for his fame and his discoveries in the inferior sciences. When Wilson claimed Darwinian science over Newtonian, he was signaling his fidelity to Hegel's science of reason in constitutional practices. A science that seeks de jure enforcement is probably not a science. It is a pseudoscience that seeks to establish pseudo-reality, also called scientism. Pseudo is the Greek word for false. So let's just get this future perfect world and give you two different parallel explanations. One tends to a mystical one, one's to a philosophical one, and between the two, you're going to have a very clear idea.
Okay.
Here's from Vogelin, a elite, one of the smartest political theorists in America, conservative, but he treats Hegel as a magician, remember? The third stratum is the imaginative construction of the ages that will permit the imaginator to anticipate the future course of history. A person envisions in his own mind the future perfect world. By means of this construction, the imaginator can shift the meaning of existence. In order to fulfill his purpose, Hegel's project must first of all eclipse all the unknown future by the image of a known future. It must first further endow the construction of the ages with the certainty of science, a system of science, and it must conceive the future age in such a manner that the present imaginator becomes the inaugurator and master. This is megalomania on a grand scale. So let me translate that for you. Okay. Downstream, how to understand science and Marxist scientific socialism, right? What does he mean? Hegel, Marx, have scientifically envisioned what the perfect future world is supposed to be. And because it is scientifically arrived at, because that's my metaphysical claim, I can now tell you what to do. And if what you do doesn't conform to that perfect world, I could treat you as unscientific and irrational. In fact, I could kick you out of society.
Mm.
Does that make sense now?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. So now let me give you Bertrand Russell's more easily to grasp one, but the two should be understood in parallel. Philosophers have professed to discover a formula of progress, showing the world was becoming gradually more and more to their liking. The recipe for a philosophy of this type is simple. The philosopher first decides which are the features of the existing world that give him pleasure, and which are the features that give him pain. He then, by a careful selection among facts, persuades himself that the universe is subject to the general law, leading to an increase of what he finds pleasant and a decrease in what he finds unpleasant. Next, having formulated his law of progress, he turns on the public and says, "It is fated that the world must develop as I say. Therefore, those who wish to be on the winning side of history," right? You want to be on the right side of history. That's always dialectical, by the way. If you want to be on the right side and do not care to wage fruitless war against the inevitable, the world's on our side, you will join my party. Those who oppose him are condemned as unphilosophic, unscientific, and just, let's put it plainly, out of date. While those who agree with him feel assured of victory, since the universe is on their side. Does this make sense?
Mm.
Now, that's part of an actual theological worldview, which is on which Hegel's metaphysical world claim runs, on which, and this is the next build, on which Marxism is dependent on. They adopted a theological worldview at the same time they declared religion dead. So people bring that up, they get in trouble. So this science of reason fuels dialectical attacks, and let's take a few pointers. By establishing the illusion of scientific certainty, the illusion of inevitability is sustained. Ridicule campaigns can be sustained against the opposition for the refusal to recognize the inevitability of claims based on the certainty of their science. Never, ever fight pseudo-realities inside the other side's constructed pseudo-reality. If you're fighting them in their future perfect world, there's no place for you to win. There's no place for Neo to win in the blue pill world as a blue pill player, no matter how right he is. Fair enough?
Yes.
If you're in a pseudo-reality, you are already being defeated. It's like fighting in the Matrix in the blue pill world. There's no jujitsuing winning at their own game because they want to lose half their attacks on you, because in those attacks they position you for the next attack by getting you to agree to their pseudo-real construct on which they'll attack you. Science of reason examples: scientific socialism, science fiction, scientism. Okay, mythology pointed forward for science fiction. I want you to take note that as science fiction keeps unrolling, it increasingly looks like a scientific version of the ancient Greek gods and other gods. They're starting to take on the form of pantheism, and they're starting to have a striation of some superheroes are superhuman and some superheroes who are demigods, Batman and Superman. Think about that. Then you go to the Marvel world where you have all these mutations and stuff like that. It keeps populating. You could find exact equivalents in ancient Greece. And if you can't find them there, you can find them in Gnosticism. For the Bible, how about Wellhausen and JEPT, or the Quella Gospel? Okay, theory, the theory of evolution, not the science of evolution. Think cultural Darwinism. We're avoiding the issue of evolution itself because that's its own discussion. Complexity theory, the world is so complex, all you can do is manage chaos. Global warming, the COVID-19 enforcement narratives. Does it make sense? So here we are, we're back at it, and you see those circles spinning on each of those three areas, the triangle of a dialectical attack, right?
Yes, I do. I see it. I do need to take a quick break. I'm so sorry to break in there. I am, but we're going to take a really quick break, and we're going to be right back. Welcome back to the Conservative Continuum. I am your host, Mick Meow. We are here with expert in dialectics, Stephen, and Coughlin. Am I saying that right, Coughlin? Coughlin. Excuse me. And I'll be honest with you. When I was told that my brain was going to expand, it is. I had to push some of it back in. But I wanna move on to where you were talking here. You were kind of pulling it together, but I kind of got a little bit lost in the weeds. Do you mind just kind of summing that up for me again?
So what we have done, and I'll go to the next slide to do that, is we've explained the three prongs of the three centers of a dialectical attack.
Okay.
So you have the dialectic itself, okay, which is the negation. You have the state as God,
Yes.
okay? And because the state is God, then the First Amendment is essentially nullified, right? Because if the state is God and you have a First Amendment right, the First Amendment right must be subordinated to the state because it's God, right? Because the right's endowed by the Creator. Fair enough?
Yeah.
And then you have the future perfect world, which is really Hegel's science of reason. And remember, his concept of the science of reason is really a metaphysical claim that he says takes priority over real science, which he called the science of understanding. It's very important because when you see Marxists make claims that their scientific socialism is real, and more important, you might say that's a metaphysical claim, it's not science at all. And for it to work, right, you have to have a dialectical claim, and you have to have the state as God enforcing it. And we're going to now we'll begin pulling this together so you see how each of these pieces works independently, but most important, and to answer a question about people being confused, how it works, because we're setting up that exact construct to explain exactly the question you asked. And you could see it's actually as firm of that. Now, the future perfect world being science of reason, remember, is that the person says, I have looked at the future and this is the future perfect world. And because I have seen the perfect world, I can turn around and negate everything in this world. And because my future perfect of the world is perfect and scientific, you're disagreeing with me means that you're just unscientific. And I don't have to respect your opinion. I don't have to respect you. And because the state is God, it will enforce that claim. That makes sense?
Yes.
So I'm trying to think of whether I do it now or I do it in a second, but I might do it now. Now think of Fauci in the lockdown. I want to give you a sense for how this plays out. If the state is God, it must demonstrate arbitrariness, right? Because if the state is God, it's correct because it said so.
Yes.
Fair enough?
Yep.
And if it's not correct because it said so, it doesn't have godlike power. So, for example, what did Fauci do? Fauci said gas masks are ridiculous. And he was right when he said it. But then he turned around and said, nope, you should wear one. And then he said, you should wear two. And you still have people wearing two. But the point of it is, people say, look at that. He's on both sides of the equation. I said, no. He's imposing the fact that he's right because he said it. And he's right because he said it because the state enforced it. Make sense?
Yes.
Arbitrary, contradictory claims, and both are true because the state said so. By the way, it's important to note that Fauci, his role does not have statutory authority to do anything that he did. And to do that, he basically had to step over a president and Congress. And, people should not take that lightly. So what you have here in this picture is those green circles circling because each of them is a ripping action in their own right. In the new one, I'm going to show each one of them as 3 drill bits spinning, and then they come together. Make sense?
Yes.
Like those giant drilling, when they're drilling in the ground. So here's the average citizen. You see that? They're in the middle of that. This triangle is of a kind with the sorcerer circle. You're inside. And now what you see is in this one, they're going back and forth. But what you see here is each one of those 3 reinforces the other 2, right? Each of them that's mutually reinforcing, and you're in the middle. Make sense?
Yes.
And they're all attacking you.
Mm.
Now, because average citizens do not know they are being targeted for attack, they cannot know those attacks reinforce each other. You don't actually see those 3 things, do you? You just know you're being attacked. The state is telling you what to do. They're telling you, here's the way to go. And they're negating a part of your worldview. Of course, the big point about saying that the Constitution is white nationalism is to do what? Negate the Constitution. That makes sense?
Yes.
All these things become very clear. And now that drill bit coming in is really focusing on you. Perceiving you're under assault by various forces in the universe, you fail to recognize they are targeted attacks that are also coordinated and interlocking. Make sense?
Yes.
You see that? Okay.
I do. I see that. I
The
I just
three-pronged attack.
go ahead. No, you go ahead. I was just thinking in my head when you were going back and talking about Fauci. I was working in clinical trials at that time. I was a nurse for 28 years. I was just thinking of that as you were talking about how Fauci he stepped over the president, he stepped over Congress, he was imposing all this law. He was science, and you had to respect that. And if you didn't, and even in the healthcare world, everybody was like, oh yeah, if he says this, it's this. If he says that, it's that. If he, all in for the science and Fauci, and if you were against it, you were against him and science. It's interesting because it's being pulled together.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Don't
I
you
didn't,
see?
I
You
didn't
see
mean
this?
to interrupt.
Oh, no. I think it's important you make that point because what I'm trying to show here is this is the build. This is the
Yes.
build to what you're seeing. So take a look at this, right? You have the wizard, you have the state as God, you have the future perfect world. Now it's Marx, which is now the dialectic went from dialectic to dialectical materialism. The state as God is now the all-powerful state. And science of reason is now scientific socialism. It's a clean, perfect translation, right? You see that?
Yeah. Yes, I do.
It's one for one. So you'll hear me say you're better off understanding Hegel than you are understanding Marx, because from Hegel, you can hit all the pieces. We're actually going to go one step further in the build we're doing on right now, but it's a one-to-one fit. Okay, dialectical materialism, the state is a repository of all authority. Scientific socialism is an imposed metaphysic labeled as science. Marxism, let me rephrase this. Marxism called it scientific socialism. They imposed it as a metaphysic. Then they called it a science and then denied that they made metaphysical claims and then enforced that. I mean, it's really that's serious. It's that clean. So COVID narratives, complexity, global warming, cultural Darwinism, scientific socialism. So the three-pronged Hegelian attack. But this is not how the target sees the attack. You don't see the attack this way. So now we're going to get to the higher. I've already explained to you why people are confused, right? But now I'm going to take it one step further. Ready?
Yep.
When executed as part of a mass line effort, obvious targets do not present themselves. The target, you, the average person, is in a political warfare fog. You're strategically disoriented. Remember, when Antifa hit, you were literally confined to your house under house arrest practically. Am I wrong?
No, that's right.
In the
That's
name
right.
of a medical crisis. Okay, you may not recognize the threat. You might not recognize there even is a threat, and you cannot articulate a targetable response. That is why the average person is confused. So did I answer your question?
Yes. No.
Does this make sense?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. It is making sense as we're going along here, pulling it together.
So
real quick, we're going to take a real quick break. That cat is just having a meltdown over here. I think he finally sees the light. Doggone it. It was.
I'm going to quickly hit the restroom. Is that okay?
Yes, please go right ahead. We're going to
Okay.
take a quick break. Welcome back to the Conservative Continuum. I am your host, Mick Meow. I don't know about you all, but I could see it, but I couldn't articulate it. I couldn't put it together. I am so grateful that you're here explaining this to us. I'm going to throw it back to you because I know you're going to bring it home for us.
Thank you, and we'll end it for today, and we'll pick up critical race theory and intersectionality in next presentation next time around. And I think you'll see that from here, this stuff starts to fall into place. And it's understanding that Marxism has a tail, and there's no understanding the body until you understand the tail. Sometimes you have to know the tail, the tooth to tail ratio, and that's the metaphor I'm trying to build, which I'm stumbling on myself doing. So let's go to the next slide, and you're going to see we're going to end where we began. So the Hegelian metaphysic, and therefore Marxism, is teleologically informed. It executes along an arc through time on a trajectory. For the target, dialectical attacks are disorienting. You have already seen this, right?
Yes. Yes.
So how dialectical attacks work in the real world, we like to think of our foes as an equal opposition, following the same strategies to win as we do, but just on the other side of a table, as if on a flat two-dimensional surface. Don't we? Don't we kind of think that way?
Yeah, absolutely.
And we project on, and then we project onto them why we wouldn't have done that if we were there. Why'd they do that? In just the same way, we tend to visualize the solar system this way, as if it's on a two-dimensional plane, right?
Yeah.
So we're bringing this full circle from the beginning. But this is actually how the solar system moves along, and it does so through a elliptical trajectory through time. So the one is how we see it, but the other is how it really moves. It's really not left versus right, it's opposing poles. Thinking we are contending against a mirror image foe fighting along a flat horizontal plane, the foe actually attacks elliptically along a vertical axis on a trajectory through time. Fair enough?
Yes.
Okay. And I apologize for the crude graphics, but I don't really.
Oh, no, I like it. I like the visual.
So while we think the other side is moving horizontally along a flat plane, his movements actually reflect a vertical helix, which comes right through the table. Now, the guy with the corn cob, let's just say he's the Marxist, okay? Right?
Okay.
So, leading us to conclude that the other side's moves make no sense when in fact it's we who are confused. That dialectical attack just broke right through the table. And keep an eye that man on the left never moves. But the other guy, people opposing him are blown right off the table. They are actually strategically disoriented, not just confused, but strategically disoriented. Complete reality dislocation. And here's my little joke. Wait, get back here. 'Tis only a flesh wound. And of course, that's from Monty Python, when the Black Knight gets all of his limbs cut off and thinks he's still fighting.
Yes.
The person you're up against playing checkers, and what's really a three-dimensional attack, he never moves or is moved. His only job is to hold you at the table. His only job is to hold you in the narrative, while you jitsu him at his own game for as long as it requires. And you know what? If they think it's going to take a while for the dialectical attack to work, he might decide to lose a couple games to keep you at the table. So long as you're in the sorcerer's circle, so long as you're inside that triangle in the dialectical attack, I want you to see how they kind of come together. There'll be a couple other things that come together. You're losing. So, that is, we can end that right here because we're going to something called Alphaben. Do you have any questions?
No, I don't. It's very clear. I will say this, and this is true transparency. I have to go back, and I really do have to kind of watch this again. But when it's explained, and even as I was watching videos and reading it, it is clear. You can see it, but you can't see it when you're in it. When you're in it and all the attacks are coming, and it's, you know, you had the COVID lockdown, you had the BLM, and you had all of that, and you're like, why is that happening? Why is that happening? It has been an incredible, an incredible episode. I'm gonna have to go back. I'm gonna have to watch it. I love what you're saying, and I agree with what you're saying. It makes sense. I do have to be one of those people that have to go back and watch the video and do it a couple times. But please tell us where we can find you. Please tell us your website.
Well, I'm at unconstrainedanalytics.org. It's one word, unconstrainedanalytics.org. One word. And that's the name of our organization. And it comes from the fact that in the IPB manual, Intelligence Preparation of the Battlefield, the one that came out in the 90s, it basically said when you're doing intelligence analysis, you must be unconstrained by your personal ideas. From a line in Sherlock Holmes, it's you follow the evidence. And if the evidence actually takes you into weird spaces, once you kind of check your work, you say, no, this is where it goes. Then you go there. And, so unconstrainedanalytics.org, and I think you'll find some stuff. We actually put together a series of papers. Some are a little big, and they actually have held up over time. They predicted everything we're seeing, and they predicted them ahead of time. So I thank you for that. You can also go in to our blog and find out the 3 parts. We have a lot of blogs. One's called Discourse Theory, which I think people have found very interesting. And another was on how you could use the matrix to understand political warfare. A whole lot of other ones, but that's where you could go to find us. And I thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. And I can't wait to have you back. We need more conversations like this. We need more information. People like me who maybe can see it, but when you're in the middle of it, you don't know what's happening. It helps, it like you said, if you just stop and realize what's going on,
What I tell you is
understand it.
there's a learning arc to this, and that so you can understand. You will get to the point where you intellectually get it, and you still can't put it together for a while. What happens is you start to see it in real time, but that's a slow conversion. Does that make sense? Because
Yes.
all of a sudden you have to rewire things a little bit, and not all of it comes right away. You have an epiphany. Someone shows you something. Oh, I never saw it that way, and then you say, well, that's because you see what you know, but now you're going to know what you see, and that's the process, and that's why I think it's so important, because to learn it today and to get it tomorrow means that maybe in about 2 or 3 months you start to see it in real time. Does that make sense?
Yes.
You'll get to a point where you'll have it happen to you, and then you're driving home and you said, gosh, I should have said it then. Why didn't I say it then? And that's just the way it is for a while. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and we can't wait to have you back.
Okay.
Thank you for curling up with us today. I am so grateful that you watched my show. The dialogue manipulation, cognitive conditioning, and identity destruction is vitally important for us to understand, recognize, and expose. Now, you need to join us next week because we're going to have a very special guest to come in and talk to us, and that guest is going to be Alex Gray. He's going to talk to us about China. So you don't want to miss that. Now, please subscribe to the Conservative Continuum on patreon.com/McMeow. You can also find us on Rumble and Facebook. The Conservative Continuum with McMeow is also on True Social, Telegram, Getter, and Substack. So don't forget, stand up, speak out, get involved, and be blessed always, my friends.